Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news. Today is Wednesday, April 29th. Another month down, another lack of satisfactory amount of progress for many people, including myself, every year, every day. But I have personally been making quite a bit of progress on blueprints. In fact, I have the game paused right now, and honestly, I'm in a run that if the game crashed or I lost progress, I'd be really upset because I'm probably at the verge of beating the first act. But there are also indications that the game is going to have a second act and a third act, and in that later part, some point, I think there might be a gigantic puzzle that requires learning a lot of stuff. In fact, it is leaning towards looking like everything you would learn individually on individual puzzles in Act 1 are going to all just combine into a super complicated numbers and reading system that is going to potentially be procedurally generated even, so the puzzles might be different each time if you mess up. Let's scroll down the 24-hour peak charts on SteamDB, and pretty much I'm going to say I don't have anything else to really talk about. Yeah, I watched the latest episode of The Boys, which was a return of 3 of the main characters from Supernatural. The character who plays Dean is playing Soldier Boy and has for a couple seasons in The Boys. So they, in this latest episode, bring the character who plays Sam, who has kind of this ridiculous beard, which maybe is a real ridiculous beard he's wearing, and Castiel shows up. Although, frankly, for a second there, it felt like Castiel was, as an actor, not even really in the room with the other two. And yeah, I guess that might still have been the case. But yeah, there was a point where Castiel was sitting around the table and they weren't even really showing his face too much, so it was hard to even really tell that it was that actor. And that whole sitting around the table scene had a whole bunch of other famous LA celebrities, and I feel like all of those shots, or a lot of those shots, were shot in a completely different soundstage remotely and then edited in. But then also in the episode of The Boys, they do this artsy fartsy thing where you're following some side stories, which I feel like this might have happened in the actual comic of The Boys, but it's the kind of thing you definitely would have taken out. Pragmata falling down to the 89th spot here. People, I think, are probably wrapping up on actually playing it. There's still a lot of promotion, and the Pragmata Diana girl character is on Twitter saying she's hacked into the Twitter of Capcom and or Sega or whatever. But yeah, I think people actually playing the game probably are hitting a saturation point there. Yeah. Even in comic book form, when you have like 2 or 3 separate stories, or you're showing the same events the same amount of time from different characters' perspective, that usually is a case where they are buying for time. Which, in fairness, I have complained in the past couple of streams about The Boys just kind of rushing forward with the story, so yeah, it was a little bit of fresh air to have kind of a side story with The Boys. But the pacing still feels really, really off. as it is. And it feels like it was very much a vacation episode where the actor who plays Homelander and the actors who play the good guys were only required in a couple of scenes. And then yeah, because I've been playing the Blueprints game, that's been taking up a massive amount of time, and I really am running into a real problem trying to sit for 12 hours. I am old and my cushions are not good enough, and both in my behind I don't think I have enough cushioning, and in my chairs I don't have enough cushioning, and so it just gets painful after 9 or 10 hours of sitting. It frankly sometimes gets painful just after 3 or 4 hours of these live streams, and I'm always concerned that it is going to straight up lead to bruising / bed sores, for lack of a better term. Pressure sores is I guess why they call them that officially. But yeah. But Blueprints has been taking the most of my time. And yeah, it is running in the background right now, paused, so if you're getting any of the background audio at all, it's really quiet. That's what you're hearing, and it also means if we take a break today, I can't go into Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Steam, for some reason, probably decent reasons for most people, but Steam's API and DRM does not allow you to run 2 games at the same time. You could probably cheat it and sandbox Steam clients to do it multiple games at the same time, but the number of people that would use that for cheating would be much higher than the number of people who would use that for legitimate reasons. We're going down the most wishlisted chart right now. But in my scenario, it would be very nice if I could have Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel running and leave Blueprints running. And if Steam tried to close Blueprints, there's a decent chance that the file would not save in any way. Yeah. Which is still one of my complaints about the Blueprints, is that it definitely feels like there should just be checkpoints and you should be able to exit based on the last room you entered. That is going to be a minimal amount of progress lost in almost every case, I think. The vast majority of what I have figured out in Blueprints is mental, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if you get to day 45 and if you haven't found room 46 by day 45, you will just reset almost everything, if not everything, and be back at day 1 in a time loop. And that wouldn't be really that bad, because the vast majority of what I've learned is things that are in my mind and in my external journal, which I'm just building out the external journal quite a bit. There's one avenue of possibility that I'm looking at around the chess pieces now, since I've figured out the puzzles with absolute certainty. I figured that part out, and that may prove to be right and that may prove to be wrong, but if it proves to be right, it is going to be very similar almost the exact same gimmick as what the what happened in the pictures puzzles. There is something I'm also kind of feeling, if I can be super critical for blueprints, is there's at least one puzzle that is fairly complicated, pointing you to something that I accidentally just wandered onto. Trying not to spoil it, but basically I was walking around, I saw something visually stood out and looked different. I investigated it because it visually stood out and looked different, and I found something and was rewarded for it. The idea that the hint to that thing involves finding a bundle of 4 pages to figure out the trigger and the secret of those 4 pages, to then wander around the mansion to find another 4 pages, is really excessive. You would think for that much work you would be getting a permanent upgrade of major importance, and I did get a permanent upgrade. It just didn't feel like it was a major importance. Yeah, and it is kind of surprising how much permanent upgrades actually exist in the game, considering at first you're really given the feeling on that day when you first start that nothing would be permanent and that there would be no permanent upgrades, and it would just be the 45th day run would be potentially exactly the same as the first day run, and you would just have to be better at playing the game. But no, the progression is far from that. It is much more like Binding of Isaac. That being said, I would say that Binding of Isaac's progression system just has so many items and so many things you can unlock that you're not going to ever really be able to compare to that with any other game. But yeah, I am on day 17, and like I said, I'm probably on the verge of beating the first act of potentially a 3-act puzzle, and I've just had major upgrades, permanent upgrades every day, changing a lot of different things, loading the dice basically, or figuratively speaking, so that I'll get boxcars more often than not. Do people say boxcars anymore? I mean, in craps, I'm sure you still say it, but would the average person know that boxcars is when you roll 6s? Yeah. It's not like modern times in 2026 people think about trains that much. But yeah, generally you're rolling 2 dice in craps, and boxcars would be rolling a double 6 or a 12, which is the only way you would get to 12 with 2 dice, regular dice, at least. Even though I do think I'll be done with Act 1, I do think that then they're just going to throw us a curveball, and there's still a lot to do in Blueprints. It's pretty obvious that that's the case because I still haven't unlocked all the possible rooms, and so it isn't really believable that I would beat the game in its totality without seeing everything. And one of the things I found is that there's a schoolhouse outside building that you eventually can build, or you're given the possibility of building it depending on your luck each day. And you really want to build that, because then that adds 8 classrooms as potential tile sets that you build inside the mansion, and you want to go through all 8 of those, because the classrooms are basically telling you the answers to a lot of different puzzles, and they are also being marked as something special in a logbook kept in the library. So yeah, there is a feeling that in the crazy story that's being told, which is many different stories, feels like there's an A plot, a B plot, and a C plot at minimum. But yeah, in part of that story, it feels like these classrooms actually did exist in the mansion at one time, and that led to the things being taught in the classrooms being translated into puzzles of other rooms. And that's where all the puzzle ideas kind of came from. And yeah, there's definitely some political intrigue and a massive amount of censorship in the story that's happening, not in the sense that the story is censored so it would be released on Steam, but in the sense that the story is talking about how the history of this world has been censored. So you'll see books that are just full of black lines that have been censored, is one of the books I found. And you'll see pages being torn out, and you'll see pictures being removed. And unfortunately, it potentially means that there's far too many characters in the story to figure out and follow, too. And one of the major things is finding notes. And it seems like there's going to be 7 or 8, probably 7 notes that are all going to be from 7 different characters talking about one plot line. But even talking about the plot line, or saying there's a plot line, even is a little bit of a spoiler for the blueprints. And I've really gone out of my way to avoid being spoiled. I actually saw on YouTube a thumbnail, and even the thumbnail seemed to be a spoiler. So you really do want to just go in blank. But I would say it is also a super complicated puzzle game, and it's not as easily digested as The Witness, because The Witness really went out of its way to remove all story from the Witness, and people criticized it for having removed the story that was being developed in it. And I imagine the story wasn't good, so it probably was the right move. But yeah, it definitely felt weird that there wasn't any story at all really in The Witness, and you were just in this island and you were just solving puzzles for the fun of solving puzzles. Blueprints feels like it's going maybe slightly a little too far in the other direction, where you are given a story before you're even given a puzzle. And a lot of rooms in the mansion, just out of a pacing necessity, don't really have much going for them. Which I do appreciate that compared to the Maze book, where every single page was just full of red herrings and visual nonsense. But yeah, you go into a hallway in Blueprints, and there isn't really that much going on there, particularly once you've memorized where spawn locations are and where you would find a potential extra gold or key or gem. And once you've already figured out the picture puzzles, they stop mattering. And then everything else in the room, as far as a 3D model of in the hallway, probably is nothing. It's just giving you maybe some flavor or a hint at something, but it's not actually going to even really give you a solution to any puzzles in any other room, as far as I can tell, and as far as I've seen. And then in some rooms, there are the chess pieces, and that is what's standing out in my mind right now, and what I'm investigating is that some rooms have chess pieces. But yeah, I might figure out the trick with the chess pieces in the rooms, and then I might start look for something else, and find that there is some connecting tissue of something else in most rooms. Although I don't know what it would really be. Occasionally you do see a few things, few like small Unity asset like 3D models, but not to a huge amount of consistency. There are swans that are showing up in a lot of rooms, so maybe that tells us something, but it probably doesn't. It is almost certainly just a hint to something I've already figured out. My other complaint about blueprints was the fact that you had to type in the password on controller every time. Not true. There's a prompt that pops up in the lower left hand corner, and I just wasn't seeing the prompt, and all you have to do is pull the left trigger and it will automatically type in the last password you typed in. And notably, it's the last password, and notably it's still forcing you to type in the last password, which I think very much guarantees that there is another password versus the one I have that can also be typed in there. But I haven't made any progress in figuring out what that other password is. But yeah, it does feel like there might be multiple passwords, and a stronger password than the easiest one to find might give you some extra ability. Now I question though if we're ever going to get to the point where you can just build the mansion however you want it and make your own strategy that way, because that feels like that wouldn't really solve too much if you had total control of building the mansion. But it'd be a nice thing to get at the end of the game. Also, I got an achievement for filling in all 45 squares with rooms, the full house achievement, which if I look at the achievements, I wouldn't be surprised if there are some other achievements fairly similar to that. That is an achievement that any lucky player, good player, would be going for anyways, because every single room is potentially another opportunity for something to happen. There have been several runs I've had where I felt like I was going to lose 2 or 3 times in the run for that day, just because I was running out of steps, or I was running out of keys, or I was running out of gems, although it's kind of hard to lose just because you're out of gems. And then I'll go into one more room, and in that one room is the thing I need: a bunch of keys, a bunch of food to give me more steps, bunch of gems, things like that. So there is a one more room aspect, and there is also a room, at least one room, that you want to end your day on that I've unlocked. So being able to unlock one more room and then be in that room when you end your day gives you an extra permanent bonus, which, yeah, it's only a small spoiler to say there are collectible stars in the game, and it's one of the permanent bonuses you can upgrade, the other being an allowance. And you want to increase the amount of stars you have up to 50, which is quite a lot considering potentially, even if you played really well, you'd only get 1 star per day, and if there is only 45 days, that's less than 50 stars. So you gotta find other ways to boost the numbers too. But yeah, the idea there of getting stars is something you should try and focus on very early in your gameplay. Otherwise, it might really suck. But then again, that might be a time loop thing where you get to day 45 and it just starts over again and the stars carry over. You also want your allowance high. I don't imagine you're going to get the allowance much higher than 9 coins at most. I have it at like 5 coins per day, and yeah, it is nice to start with 5 extra coins. Other permanent boosts raise some other stuff too. Every day I start, but yeah, finding the permanent boost that gives you like 20 extra steps early is also extremely helpful. I would be having considerably worse runs if I hadn't found that permanent boost. And that is why I'm so far ahead as I am, I think, is simply because I've lucked into finding permanent upgrades very early in the gameplay. I definitely think it would be very believable that even somebody who was as good at puzzles or even better than puzzles than me would have just not found the permanent boosts as early as I had, and would be having a much worse time, and that would certainly explain why I think I'm going to beat Act 1 on day 17, which, if it's a 3-act play, day 17 would be a third of 45. It would be over a third of 45 days. So I'm actually 2 days behind. But it's probably a weird way to measure it, too. Yeah. I know Cracking the Cryptic, I have not watched any of their videos, but I know they're on to episode 41, I believe, of 2-hour live streams on average. So they are much longer into the game than I am, with 2 of the smartest pen and paper puzzle solvers in the world. And that might actually be hurting them because they're not actually that video game adept. So video game gimmicks or things that would just be pretty obvious to a video gamer might be flying over their head completely. They also might very well be too in the weeds looking at red herring stuff, whereas my mind in Blueprints ignored and just assumed that a lot of the stuff that was being thrown at us was red herring noise. As I get deeper, it may be that none of it actually is red herring noise, but it was easy enough to ignore what you don't understand until you understand it and focus on what you do understand. Yeah, inherently, if I only really need to know a surface level understanding of who the characters are and what the backstory is to solve the puzzle, I am a little bit more likely to actually only learn that much and not have the deep lore understanding from reading all the books and memorizing everything that is being written in the books. And that is very much shows in my system of making notes and just converting things from notes down to a very small 3, 4, 5 word sentence. Of course, I've also turned to taking a lot of pictures with my camera phone, my cell phone camera, and of the screen, instead of actually trying to surmise it. One of the things that I think will probably play a role is you're going to have to learn the family history of the character you're playing. Your mother, your father, your uncle, grandfather, great grandfather, possibly too. And they are all royalty, or at least some of your history is royalty, so you'll have barons and counts and dukes, and maybe not dukes, but queens, princesses. The weirdest part about the blueprints is it definitely seems like you have a brother, or maybe you don't have a brother, but you had a brother, or your uncle had a brother. I mean, your uncle definitely had a brother. That is always true. But yeah, there is a brother character that has been mentioned a couple times who weirdly just seems like they're not around, and doesn't seem like they are being a major factor in the story at all, which seems weird. It would be weird if you had an evil twin type of antagonist character come out of nowhere in a puzzle game. The antagonist, I guess, at the moment is actually, I think it's your uncle, who donated you the estate and told you to find room 46 of a 45 room estate. Moving on, Pokemon TCG Pocket has a new update. New pack of cards are out, so progress continues there. They've also updated a lot of how they present rewards. Now it is much more about when you have the cards to build a pre-built deck, you are given the rewards for building a bunch of the pre-built decks automatically, instead of being given a bunch of extra currencies that you can then spend to buy certain rewards. Inherently, this means it is taking away choice from you, more than likely, as far as if you wanted to get certain flair items earlier than others, but it is also simplifying the experience, because the game had far too many currencies in it, and a lot of those currencies were just never going to actually connect to the premium currency. Even now, Pokemon TCG Pocket still has too many currencies in it, because there's a gold premium currency, there is packs as a currency, there are stamina cubes as a currency to play special events, there are stamina cubes to trade, and there are stamina cubes to do wonder picks. Yeah, all of those cubes probably could be bought with the premium currency also. So yeah, they took it from being about 10 secondary currencies down to 5 secondary currencies, which is still too many. And that's not even considering the third tier currency that is only used for adding cosmetics to the cards. They've also added gold borders to some cards if you have like 10 copies of them, which yeah, is really just designed to push people to have even more copies of Pokemon cards, that when really you can only have 3 in a deck. Yeah. I'm up to having 11,000 11,000 Pokemon TCG virtual cards as a free-to-play player playing from day one, and it's still underwhelming as much as that happens. I'm still also playing Memento Mori on one account at least. I'm actually making progress so far ahead that I don't actually have anything to really do special. There's no new characters to draw for. It's interesting, Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel has now fallen down below Memento Mori. Although Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, I think, is maybe a slightly older game. You would think it wouldn't fall down to nearly the 50th spot. But yeah, while I'm playing Blueprints, doing cell phone daily games becomes less of a thing, which does mean I have done less engaging with like cracking the cryptic Sudoku YouTube videos in the past couple days too. The other thing, of course, that's dancing in my mind is I really need to figure out a better balance. And I don't think there's going to be a better balance with Blueprints because it doesn't have a checkpoint system. So potentially the entire next month is going to just be me playing Blueprints and not really doing too much as far as cleaning and decluttering my house, and just this will be an excuse to take a prolonged break, as it were, which is probably fine. It's not great, but yeah, that's probably how it's gonna go. Don't think I'm gonna get to building my computer or anything like that. I did try out a air blower I got, and boy, for a battery powered handheld type device, it really does create a lot of air. I was really thinking it would be a wimpy thing that would barely make any air at all and not be anything close to a compressed air can, but no. The battery air dusters, if you get a good one like I did, I guess, seem to be perfectly capable of replacing compressed air cans, which are one-time use and not good for the environment. And so I am happy to have gotten that. Frankly, it's not even the environment that I'm happy as a reason to get rid of it. It's simply because it's a hassle to just have to order more of them when it runs out, and it usually runs out at the most inconvenient time. Alright, so I'm gonna have to take a bathroom break, and that means I'm gonna have to just leave this where it is. So I'll be back in a few minutes. Did I not pause it? Well, apologies to everybody, I guess then. If I didn't pause the recording, I feel like maybe I accidentally just clicked it and unpaused it. Let's see. Do we have any idea as far as any way of knowing that? Yeah, I think I just unpaused it. I am unpaused now, though, as far as I can tell. So yeah, I must have just unclicked it right then. Alright, yeah, sorry for that. This does certainly highlight the problem with not having Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel being able to be open. At some point, it kind of makes sense to do the live streams on a completely different computer than the pre-recorded video game setup, and you know, there might be a transition time where that really is just what happens. Of course, if I do make that compromise, it's probably going to go on for way longer than it should. But yeah, moving over to a new computer with Bakelite Linux instead of Windows, it does, at a certain level, kind of make sense that a lot of the more custom setups stuff that I have on Windows now for the live streams might just take longer to transition over. Which, yeah, I'm always paying for tech debt, as most people who are doing anything technical are paying for tech debt, as far as we didn't likely set the things up to be easily updatable, upgradable, and transitionable to something else. Yeah, I definitely didn't set up my OBS settings and everything in a way that it could just all be easily copy and pasted over from Windows to Linux, and OBS is not set up really for that to happen either. A lot could be transitioned over, but a lot will take more effort. One thing I will say about playing Blueprints, since I've already said a ton of things, so I don't know why I'm saying one thing in that case, is that, yeah, once I'm done with Blueprints, I will be probably done with puzzle games for a while, or if I am going to play a different puzzle game, it will be a very different puzzle game. I don't think I would jump into the likes of Escape Academy or Escape Simulator right after that. Yeah. Because that is a little too much. As a little too much back to back. And I don't want to run into a scenario where I'm like halfway through the second game and I am just burnt out. So yeah, Blueprints is going to be a very long running, very satiating puzzle game, I can tell. Steam Deck refurb still not available. Steam Deck's non-refurbs, I imagine, are also not available. Controllers not quite out yet as far as the Steam controller, but I've seen a few more people cover it and review it, and yeah, the consensus I feel like I'm getting from it is a great alternative to the Xbox Pro controller if you are in the market for the Xbox Pro controller or something at that higher expense level. That being said, if you are just used to a PlayStation controller or an Xbox Core controller, you can get those cheaper, and yes, they'll have less features, but yeah, it's going to be hard for a lot of people to break away from getting a cheaper controller and just being okay with what they've got, and it's going to be hard to break people away from like PlayStation or Xbox controllers if that's what feels good in your hands, or 8-bit though controllers. I don't think anybody's going to make the argument that the Joy-Cons feel better in your hands. Yeah, and the Joy-Cons, the Joy-Con 2s for the Switch 2s are different than the Joy-Con 1s of the Switch 1, but I don't think either one of them are particularly great. Yeah. It's also worth pointing out that the vast majority of console games, if you tend to play console games, will also have Xbox Core controller support, and basically any controller support for the what am I trying to say? For most games, you if it has controller support on the console version, it's going to have controller support that's very good on PC. So the configuration people aren't really talking about, that by far would be cheaper than getting the Xbox controller with the touchpads. Not the Xbox controller, the Steam controller with the touchpads, would be to get a Xbox Core controller on sale, and then get a $15 wireless touchpad keyboard device that they have all kinds of those on Amazon, and then you would just flip that on every now and then if you needed a mouse input, if you needed to type quite a bit of stuff. Seems like we might be back to sponsored content, and that might be why Video Games Chronicle News is not open right now. So see if this will open up a bunch of these articles. Real quickly. I definitely was thinking about, as I am staying up all throughout the night playing Blueprints, a way in which I could have jumped in here and started streaming a little bit earlier. I don't know why I'm streaming earlier though. Like, I think it probably would make more sense to just wait until like closer to 5 in the evening, or even 8 or 9 or 10 in the evening before streaming, and just go deep into the night with the video game news, because that definitely does feel like I'm not really accomplishing anything otherwise throughout the day. Let's scroll up here and see. By the way, if you hear like birds cooing in the background, that is Blueprints. I happen to be in an area next to birds where the game is paused. And yeah, thank goodness the game doesn't have a timer, because if there was a real timer in it and you unpaused it, and that created problems for me again without a checkpoint system, that would be annoying. Alright, so Video Games Chronicle Stories. Again, today I'm going to try and just rush through everything. I suppose it's also worth pointing out that, at least for a brief second, according to my own internal Steam metrics of YouTube, not Steam metrics, internal YouTube metrics, I have hit 1,100 subscribers. It's a round number. It doesn't really mean much. Maybe it means a 10% increase in subscribers over the course of 4 or 5 months, which is nice. Watch time and number of views, pretty low these days, however. A big part of that is because I'm not putting out footage and content enough. But yeah, even for these live streams, the number of views has been pretty bad for the past week, and watch time has always been pretty bad. I still roughly need 4 times as much watch time as I'm getting. So for every single viewer, I need them to watch 4 times as much, or I need to get 4 times as many viewers. And that's just to barely make it past the threshold, at which point they might let me monetize my channel, which would certainly help a little, but I don't know if anything's really going to help. Economics wise, yeah, the prices of things are just going up and up, and the ability to get paid for things is stagnant, if not going down. Also, speaking of YouTube, I watched a Jacksepticeye video and was reminded why I don't watch his videos. I absolutely hate how he does his content. It is benign. No, benign's the wrong word. It is absolute drivel. He just is putting on this fake personality, this super ridiculous high energy personality, and making a whole bunch of stupid jokes while doing let's plays for the game. He's adding really zero criticism, zero review, zero commentary, and zero education. So if it was to really come down to a court case as far as fair use, his video, I would think, would be a prime example of something that fails. He's not as bad, I suppose, as people who are just doing react videos and then sitting there for 20 minutes and not actually reacting to it, but just going, yeah, I agree with that, or no, or that's dumb. But honestly, even those react videos are at least giving some form of critique, where Jacksepticeye kind of barely is doing any of that. And yet he's super successful and made it to Hollywood. He probably had some Hollywood connections, and cronyism probably helped him quite a bit anyways, but it is infuriating to me to see that the popular things are the things that are just the most ridiculous things that you would target to kids. Kid slop, I guess, might be a good phrase to coin. But then again, I guess I don't also have a really great example of any real successful video game reviewers. There's a few medium ones I actually do like. PewDiePie is not a video game content creator anymore, and it's kind of annoying that he's was able to get so successful being a video game content creator and then just completely change his channel to being a daddy blogger or life blogger channel. Let's see. Anyways, that's just me rambling. Resident Evil Requiem producer says players should try to beat the game next week to prepare for the DLC. Which previously announced that a minigame was set to be added in May. So one would assume that the DLC is going to be advertised around some spoilers around the main game of some sort. And I guess that kind of makes sense. It's kind of hard to make DLC for a story game that doesn't focus on events that happen after the main story, or add something in the middle of the story which still would be a spoiler, or do a prequel that gives some more coloring of the events of the main story. If you do a DLC that is completely disconnected from the main story, then it really probably shouldn't be a DLC in the first place. And that's one of the things I was thinking about while I was playing Blueprints 2, is that the Talos Principle 2 is one of the few big puzzle games that actually made a sequel, and I really felt like Talos Principle 2 suffered by being called Talos Principle 2 and being actually a sequel instead of just being its own separate game with different types of puzzles. For puzzle games, I think DLC is probably the best way in which you can add more content. Otherwise, you just have to make a new game with a different title and not make a sequel. It would be crazy to make a Witness 2. You could do it. You could create a whole different island. You could create a whole different set of puzzles. You probably would have to create completely different types of puzzles that are not in any way close to the puzzles in the Witness 1. Otherwise, it would be too easy. But at that point, why are you calling it the Witness 2 instead of just calling it something different? Even Myst had Riven, called the sequel to Myst, stand out as its own separate thing. And in the case of Myst and Riven, those games are much older as far as puzzle games and 3D open world environments, but they also make a mistake that we learned from in the future, in that each puzzle in Myst is basically a bespoke puzzle that is wholly separate and different from all the other puzzles. So there is no progression in the mind of learning how things work. And that all culminates in Myst with the fireplace puzzle, which is a very different type of puzzle that you had not seen anything close to it up before that point in Myst. The fireplace puzzle is the very last puzzle in the game, basically. At least before they added that special edition area. But yeah, Myst itself probably should have just been called Myst, considering how, while Riven is a good game, it could have been its own standalone game. That being said, yeah, the most recent games from Cyan, the company that made Myst, did not catch people's attention at all. And it has been more on the line of new companies to come in and make puzzle games instead. Anyways, I'm rambling here, I know. The quote here is, "We're hard at work on it." Valve says the Steam Deck 2 is still in development and acknowledges that the ongoing Steam Deck stock has issues. There's only so much we can do about the RAM shortage, they say. I shouldn't say it says. Valve being treated as a entity when it is Valve programmer Pierre-Luc Griffiths who actually is saying these things. I'm assuming that a Steam Deck 2 is going to be very incremental and is just going to feel incremental. I wouldn't be surprised if a Steam Deck 2 just hits a price point and is maybe 2 to 3 times better than the Steam Deck OLED, because I don't think there's really too much that needs to be changed there. A higher resolution screen with a smaller bezel would be nice. USB-C on the bottom as well as the top, I think should have happened the first time. You might get to a point where micro SD card readers are not included, and frankly they might even go the framework route, and there might be a embedded spot for a USB-C connection that you could put an adapter to make it a micro USB reader if you want it, or you could put something else around this. Here I'm hitting a point where I hate that the internet never evolved into all pictures being actually 3D models, because I would love to be able to just like click and drag this picture and spin it around and show the back of the Steam Deck. Unfortunately, we do not live in that sci-fi future. But on the back of a Steam Deck, particularly in the center, it is just a bunch of flatness. So you could easily have 3, 4, 5, 6 USB-C slots in a little alcove at the bottom, and with that you could put all kinds of adapters that would connect to all kinds of things, including a keyboard attachment. Come to think of it, keyboard and mouse attachment, dock attachment. But yeah, I don't know if you really need the physical device of a micro SD card reader, the physical thing on the board. It's probably easier to assemble something like that, but you could potentially save a few bucks and then instead just have more USB-C connections. It would be very believable, frankly. You can have an alcove with 4 USB-C connections there at the bottom, which then would let you connect 4 wired USB-C controllers to it, and maybe you put 1 HDMI connection, which I think you get 1 free HDMI without having to pay more of a license, or maybe you have some kind of EVGA connection even that would be on the bottom for specifically for graphics. But yeah, it's really connectivity that I think you would add. I still feel like somewhere they need to eventually add mouse wheels for weapon selection into controllers. I don't think that idea has been discussed or thought of by anybody but me, so it's probably not going to happen. There's tech specs like a newer version of Bluetooth, certainly for Steam Deck 2, just better CPU and GPU. Be nice if you could upgrade the RAM yourself, and Steam Deck probably is big enough that you could have removable RAM, upgradable RAM. But yeah, we're not going to get to a point where you'll have removable, upgradable CPUs and GPUs. But yeah, it's really not much more that I think you could change for it. You'd get really ridiculous if you had like a projector built into it where it would project onto a screen. Well, that might be a cool sounding feature. It really wouldn't get used that much. There have been a couple of phones that had projectors built into them that project on the wall, and the truth is they're just never very high resolution, and they're not very bright. You could have camera, but if you're going to go that route, again, just like a USB-C spot where you could sell a camera accessory, I think is just as good of an idea. Could have a VESA mount on the back if you wanted to mount it on some kind of holder. But you could probably do that with just a added accessory case. But there's kind of nothing else you can really do with it that I can think of. When we look at the Steam controller has the buttons that have been evolved from the Steam Deck. So there's nothing really new in the Steam controller other than maybe the grip sensors that could be added back to a Steam Deck 2 and feed into that. And when we look at the Steam machines, as far as what's been talked about and shown so far, there doesn't feel like there's a lot in that would be added to a Steam Deck 2. So yeah, I definitely would expect it is going to be incremental improvements. Honestly, if prices are still bad, it might very well be that they just find a way to make something that is as powerful as the Steam Deck 1 or slightly better, but not by much, just to maintain pricing. It may very well that be the case that they will run out of stock for RAM or CPUs that are being used on the Steam Deck at the moment. Let's see. Moving on, PlayStation has seemingly added a 30-day DRM check to all newly purchased digital PS4 and 5 games. Tests suggest players won't be able to play their digital games if they go 30 days without connecting online. Interesting. It's not really that onerous of a requirement, but it certainly sucks for people who might be deployed and can't connect to the internet, or have people who are on farms that don't have the internet. But then, frankly, why would you buy digital versions in those scenarios instead of using a disc version? Yeah. Wouldn't be surprised if this kind of limit already exists on Xbox and Nintendo, and I wouldn't be surprised if this kind of limit also exists on Steam. But it also certainly is one of those other reasons why piracy just by default becomes better. Having the cracked DRM version of something with no limitations is better than having the limitations version. Let's see. Moving on. A demo for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is available now for Switch 2 and Xbox Series X. Well, I'll leave it at that. Arc Raiders' latest update has broken crossplay, but Embark is working on that. This is a crazy looking outfit, which is very different than this crazy looking outfit, which is fairly different from this outfit that doesn't look anywhere as crazy. So you see something like this and I have no idea what Arc Raiders is as a game. Yeah, other than it's probably a looter shooter game or something like that. Some player versus player something. A third Nintendo Illumination movie is set for 2028 according to the Universal schedule. A copyright previously suggested the pair are working on a Donkey Kong spin-off. I think that would probably make some sense, considering I think I heard Donkey Kong was not in Mario Galaxy. And so it may very well be that the Mario movies are going to test out other characters. If this next movie is a Donkey Kong spinoff, you would expect the movie after that, if a fourth movie gets made, would be a Star Fox spinoff. There is a question, certainly, what they're doing with what the heck are they doing with the Mario franchise and movies, though, and how much of that is going to really affect Mario games or Nintendo games in general. They are kind of moving slowly, because if this is a Donkey Kong movie that comes out, there probably won't be another Donkey Kong game, not a big Donkey Kong game at least, that comes out to be in line with the movie, which is also true with the Mario Galaxy movie. There wasn't a big Mario game to promote at the time. Yeah, Mario Odyssey would have been the most recent Mario game that's new, other than Mario Kart World. These schedules for movies don't tend to mean much. Things get canceled, things get pushed back. You can see also they have a Fast Forever mentioned here as far as the Fast and Furious series and a Mummy franchise movie. And then there's another animation movie that is also coming out from Universal Studios. Moving on, the next story says, as hackers say they have cracked Denuvo DRM, 2K and Denuvo reportedly added a mandatory 14-day check to some games. There are still problems playing games with Denuvo on Linux with the Proton compatibility layer, because even if one of the Proton versions works really well, every time you change which version is being used, Denuvo considers that activating the software on a different piece of hardware, and after a certain number of hardware checks, you'll be locked out. So very often I'm still hearing stories of people trying to get their game to run well and then being locked out of it before they can even really start it, which that 2 hours no question asked refund policy might kick in at that point for some people. If I was running Denuvo, I would definitely fire my PR company and hire a better one, though there's definitely a case where not a single story ever comes out positive around Denuvo, and there's way more negative stories around Denuvo than any other DRM that exists out there. Like, people don't talk about easy anti-cheat, for instance, or the VAC bans. Feels like Denuvo might be the cheapest and worst quality of the DRMs. But then there might also be a synergy between EA games, which kind of suck anyways, and have probably some pretty irate customers, and Denuvo. Let's see, Witcher 3 veterans share Blood of the Dawnwalker gameplay and set release. It's always annoying when they describe a new company as it's some of the people who worked on this other bigger game. Because, yeah, usually it's one or two people who worked on the previous games, not the 30 to 100 people as a whole team that worked on the previous game. This Blood of the Dawnwalker could be something, but it very easily could be nothing. Games Done Quick is coming to Europe for the first time with 3 days of Gamescom speedruns. The charity event will be streamed live from Gamescom in August. I have hit a point, it's probably been several years since I've actually been happy with Games Done Quick and actually wanted to watch any of their videos. There was a time in the early days where I found it fairly fun, but they kind of ran out of new games to stream, and they kind of stopped being fun. A whole bunch of controversies have popped up around these speedrunning events. Not huge controversies around like the money being donated or anything like that, but just controversies around more of the entertaining presenters being banned and replaced with less entertaining people, or more of the entertaining games being speedrun being replaced with less entertaining speedruns. But yeah, the gimmick of speedrunning on its own probably would have never really had any appeal to me, because that is for fairly obsessive, fairly niche audience. The gimmick of speedrunning and having people comment on it and do funny things and talk about the funny things did have some appeal when they were actually being funny. And maybe my taste just changed. Maybe I just became an old fart. But yeah, the general idea of 4 other speedrunners or friends on a couch behind the speedrunner gives you that whole Mystery Science Theater feel to it, which it basically is the same concept too. Like Mystery Science Theater 3000, 2000, whatever, would have been a terrible show if they were just showing the old public domain movies they were showing. They needed to cram in a whole bunch of jokes and commentary on the movie to make it feel like it was worth people's time. And in the case of Mystery Science Theater 3000, they were pre-recording all of that, so they weren't really ad-libbing jokes as much. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if each of those movies were being watched in a room with 5 to 6 writers 4 or 5 times to get a script down for what the actors were going to say. Like, a new theory says PS4 and PS5 30-day digital game timers are temporary to stop piracy, and it became permanent after 14 days. It's now claimed the timer changes to a permanent license after a 14-day period. Okay. It doesn't make a lot of sense though, because the numbers don't line up there. A 30-day digital timer would turn into a permanent non-timer after 14 days. Yeah. It would have to be after 14 days of actually connecting to the internet one time, or after 14 days in a row being connected. So yeah, there's a mystery here that may really mean nothing at all. It sounds to me like very possibly there are just 2 bits of code, and they found these 2 bits of code, and one of them says there's a 30-day digital timer on it, and then the other one is a 14-day timer. And if you disable the 14-day timer, the 30-day timer would be a factor, but it doesn't seem like at the moment that 14-day timer is disabled. It really doesn't kind of change too much either, though. Like, the whole system seems to still work basically the same way as you'd expect it to work. I guess maybe the thought is that if you pirated the game and tried to crack the digital game, you would have the 30-day timer in the game still, if you did like a really bad job of cracking the software and not just stripping out all the timers. Yeah, that's the only thing that kind of makes sense, is that if the 14-day timer only gets added to your code after 14 days. Moving on, Namco's Japan-only 1994 arcade game Cyber Commando is getting a home release for the first time. Cyber Commando was the sequel to vehicle combat game Cyber Sled. A 6-game collection of retro Rugrats titles coming next month. Rugrats Retro Rewind Collection will be released on the Switch and PC. I'm pretty sure we talked about this a long time ago. These are old games, though, if you're talking about Rugrats. I suppose there might be an argument to rebooting and bringing back Rugrats, but I just don't see a reason, and I don't think a series like Rugrats would be actually that popular with a new generation. Inherently, I think Nintendo just, not Nintendo in this case, Nickelodeon, just needs to go forward and make new cartoons. I don't know how much of that they really are doing, if they're doing any of that. I would have thought more of the streaming services would have put more effort into making new cartoons, but maybe they've realized they don't need to do that, and it's just cheaper and easier to license out old cartoons and have them watch those. Although it is also weird that if you go to Netflix and cartoons, it's not like Looney Tunes are super prominent and easy to find, or actual public domain cartoons are easy to find. Like, you would have thought Steamboat Willie as a cartoon, now being in the public domain, would have day one appeared on Netflix or Prime Video. And if they are on those services, they certainly aren't prominent enough that you would see them. Yep. Monument Valley's boss says it was, quote, too romantic about giving staff long-term job security, thinks contractors are the future. Us2 Game CEO says hiring more contractors and lowering cost is now fundamental. As a terrible way to phrase it, but it is definitely, I think, one of the strategies we're going to just start to see is that more and more temporary workers, more and more contractors are going to be hired in the game industry instead of permanent workers with any kind of benefits or job security. Which, in fairness, it would probably paint a more realistic situation of what the situation is like as working in the game industry, considering how there's just so many layoffs in the first place. At least if you're a contractor, you know your contract ends once the game is canceled or comes out, whichever happens first. And with a contractor thing, then theoretically people would negotiate better pay to buy their own health insurance and life insurance and things like that, medical, dental stuff like that, but it never works out that way. I've never seen a scenario, particularly in the United States, where a contractor actually can negotiate for the 2 to 3 times pay that they should be getting because they're not getting benefits, and then is also capable of spending that extra time to find their own benefits and pay for it. It would be certainly nice if all of those healthcare and life insurance and things like that were illegal to be connected to your employer paying for them, because that creates this entrapment system where you lose your job, you lose your healthcare. But not a high chance of that happening in the United States either. Particularly for the creator of Monument Valley, I wouldn't really look at them as a beacon of running a great company. Like, they've made a couple of games, Monument Valley games, that are decent enough, but have always been overpriced and haven't been that long or really that impressive. They certainly haven't taken the amount of success they've had and expanded it into other games or other ideas. If anything, I think Monument Valley has just done a lot of hiring and firing and attempts to acquire companies or be acquired, things like that. And a lot of licensing of Monument Valley to Netflix, and yeah, it would be much better for us two games for them to be announcing a new game right now and not talking about how they plan on hiring contractors. Also, from an artistic creative perspective, tells you you're never going to get anything consistent from us two games. So if you see us two games as the developer of a game, that means nothing now, because you know they're just hiring contractors and it will be a unique contractor for that one job. So the programming could be randomly good or randomly bad, the art could be randomly good or randomly bad, and the next game the dice are just going to be rolled again. Moving on, a Japanese retailer is trying to stop Pokemon card scalpers by making them take a test first. Customers can only buy cards if they can answer 15 trivia questions. Okay. I mentioned before, I'm in the very early stages of thinking about making a movie group and 4 private home viewings in person. I was going to test them by having them go through a movie gauntlet with the movies, them being asked to watch and write a 3 to 5 sentence review on being Silence of the Lambs, Princess Mononoke, and Monty Python's The Life of Brian, which might just be called The Life of Brian. And so I'm kind of thinking of that gauntlet questionnaire being similar to this, and it kind of seems like a good idea. It's a little bit weird when a store is doing it, but everybody hates the scalpers. The hostility around the scalpers is almost certainly affecting stores quite a bit. So I imagine the Japanese would applaud a very Japanese solution here of making them take a test. I have also, on my movie group, found a couple of Discord bots that would make organizing that and potentially having virtual viewings a possibility. So that might be a thing to revisit, particularly when I'm done with Blueprints. Right now, Blueprints is going to take all my time up. But yeah, I'm hoping for the question they would tell you what the questions are. This is funny. It's a Japanese sign translated to French. So maybe the quiz is not public, or maybe the quiz is different every time. I also wouldn't be surprised if this is actually just a sneaky Japanese way. Usually the Japanese are not even that sneaky about it, of them not letting foreigners, by this that could be Koreans as much as Americans, buy things, because like a Japanese language sign saying you have to take a quiz and then being handed a Japanese quiz written in Japanese is definitely a sneaky way to create effectively a literacy test, which is some of the racist ways in the old days in the United States they would prevent black people from voting, is they'd create these impossible to answer literacy tests and then really only force black people to take the test in the first place. But yeah, in this case, anybody who wasn't fluent in Japanese would obviously fail the test. I'm a little surprised if we zoom in here. While the Japanese do love gadgets, I'm a little surprised that they have digital signage. That's not something I've particularly seen. And you can see they put a sale sign over the digital sign. Yeah, digital signage is creating a tons of e-waste, just so that stores can prevent, I guess, paper waste of having to change prices when they put new stickers on things, or have surge pricing, which that's really what they're setting up for, is that it's going to be a case where in the future prices will change based on times of day or just based on random factors, and then eventually it's just going to be the signs are updating their price specifically for the person in front of them. They're just going to be able to identify your cell phone as you, and when you stand in front of the price tag, it's going to be the price that they are charging you, which might be more or might be less. Regardless, it's going to almost certainly be unfair, however it is implemented. There's already a major amount of unfairness in pricing around things like Uber, where you can have two people standing in the exact same spot ordering the exact same ride and getting different prices, and there's a ton of unfairness based on just the neighborhood, where a poor neighborhood might be getting charged more for things than a rich neighborhood might be, or vice versa, even in the same city. I kind of wanted to answer the quiz, though. I would try to answer the quiz. I probably would fail, particularly if it's not original first generation Pokemon. Like, I can't tell you the name of this Pokemon here. So if they actually asked me any question around that, I would fail that. Let's see. May's PlayStation Plus essential quote free games include EA Sports FC 26, Black Myth Wukong, and Nine Souls also seems. And then Nacon's collapse claims its first closure as the RPG studio confirms it no longer exists. The Greedfall developer Spiders has been shut down. I feel like we may have already talked about this. But yeah. The economy is still doing pretty bad for video games in particular, but also just pretty bad for everybody. The US Fed just announced that they're going to keep rates the same, which probably isn't going to change the stock markets too much, but there's definitely a big desire in the US presidency to lower rates, and amongst stock holders to lower rates too, and lower rates would also perhaps make it a little bit easier to borrow money for houses and cars. Which I heard they're proposing anti-drowsy features being mandatory in cars, where there will just be a camera in the speedometer dashboard that is looking at your face, and if the algorithm, the AI algorithm, or whatever it will be, thinks you're sleepy, it'll warn you, or it will beep at you if you take your eyes off the road, things like that. Which that could create more problems than it solves, but I imagine it probably does solve a lot. I heard there was a car, at least one of them, that suggested the driver stand up and walk around, because sitting in a car for a long amount of time potentially is going to create an embolism in your leg and potentially kill you. So just being reminded to get out and take a break and walk around is a good move. And frankly, if you are driving for a long amount of time, it's not a terrible thought too. Usually you have to get up and walk around for a bathroom break anyways, but there are people that can hold it way longer than others. Moving on to the Gematsu articles. Greedfall developer Spiders has been shut down. The Paris-based studio's been in operation since 2008. We'll see if there's a French union lawsuit there. I suspect there will be for the company being shut down, although it might be very easy to lay off everybody if you actively just shut the entire company down versus trying to keep the company in business. This is another great opportunity for me to go on to a rant where if a company goes down, goes out of business, I think the intellectual property of that company should not be sold off to pay debtors who knew the risks. I think the intellectual property would better suit society and serve society if it became public domain, and that would be a great incentive to not actually go out of business if all of a sudden Greedfall: The Dying World, Steel Rising, and the original Greedfall world would just become public domain forever. Somebody would come in and keep the company afloat in that case, and that would employ at least a few people instead of getting rid of everybody and then being able to sell off assets to some non-acting IP holder, some patent troll type holder, which very possibly will now buy the rights to these games. Although for video games, that's usually not a patent troll that buys them. It's usually just another crappy video game company like Ubisoft or EA will buy the rights to them and do nothing with them and profit off of them, despite the fact that they put none of their effort into actually developing those games. Moving on, NBA The Run launches in June. Is this a new generation NBA Jam game? It'd be interesting if it is. One of the reasons why I would say NBA Jam was so popular is that it was one of the few games that was available for the Sega Genesis when it came out. So there wasn't a lot of competition, and it was a good game, certainly, but in modern times, I don't know if there's a big enough audience of people that really wants to play a dunk session arcadey basketball 3-on-3. I guess it's probably the team sizes. Yeah, I don't know if basketball is really that popular. Yeah, I heard somebody talking about on a podcast how it's just becoming increasingly less acceptable and common for people to be shirtless too. It's kind of surprising here. You see the occasional short topless player, and I say player here because yeah, free to nipple and all. That would be interesting, certainly, if that was something that was added as a feature to a basketball game. And what they're showing there as far as characters is it did look like there was a few not topless ladies playing against the men, which basketball might be one of those games where, well, a lot of these games actually probably would be a little bit more interesting if they were just forced co-ed and there was just on a team there must be at least one female on each side, playing more strategy on a basketball game or on a baseball game. Same idea. Like I feel like you could easily have female baseball players in certain spots. Maybe put them on like first base or third base or infield positions, pitcher positions every now and then. But yeah, embracing a different diversity of play styles that tend to occur when you have a diversity of genders playing, I think works pretty well. And in the case of baseball, you don't have too many physical collisions. In the case of basketball, sure, there might be some weird groping going on when you're guarding people in basketball. So there might be some issues there, but probably not that much. And I guess in video game form you can have something like that where it is intergendered and not run into problems that would happen in the real world. But yeah, maybe I was mislooking at the playthrough too, the trailer. I could have sworn I saw some female characters. Let's go back here, because none of the screenshots are showing a single female character. And let's see if we can, how we even pause it. Yeah, no. Yeah, there's totally a female player there. And I guess when you're giving them magical abilities, that also makes things a little bit easier too, with an NBA Jam type experience. You can balance things out more. Anyways, moving on, Monopoly Star Wars Heroes vs. Villains pre-order is now available. I'd assume this is a digital game since Gamatsu is talking about it. I imagine there already has been some kind of Monopoly game in physical form. Now, as far as I have heard, WNBA women's basketball is incredibly hated amongst basketball fans in general. And so that might very well be why there is no screenshot or pictures here showing any of the female players. But yeah, there is. It definitely sounds like there's some problems there as far as just how WNBA is run and how those games just get played and get officiated. Yeah, and at a certain level, it's the bureaucracy above the players, and it is the coaches that seem to be what people complain about the most. Yep, Monopoly Star Wars. I'm going to put this on the fall list. It feels like there's been a history of board games being terrible in digital form. And I don't think I've actually seen or gotten a single Monopoly on Steam. I don't know what other Monopolies would even be available. You can see they're relating it to Uno and Carcassonne. And the more like this is not going to give me a Monopoly offering. Yeah, this Monopoly, new Monopoly from 2024 is mostly negative. So I didn't ever buy it. I think Life 2 here might be somewhat positive. Cluedo is very positive. I have an earlier version of that though. Cluedo. Excuse me. And yeah, there we have a random thumbnail that's lewd. It's a random game being recommended in that section. So yeah, one would hope that this is actually good. People actually like it. Inherently, though, you are still just playing Monopoly, which sucks. It is kind of a shame that the slightly more interesting board games aren't remembered and aren't popular. Because, yeah, I would take something like 1313 Dead End Drive over Monopoly any day. And that's a board game that people definitely don't remember. Or Snakes and Ladders or Candyland. Those, I don't think, have digital games. Sure, you have Tabletop Simulator and you can probably simulate it, and your experience is going to be pretty rough there. A lot of it is the case that board games are really too expensive in their digital forms, and so you're not getting the benefit of saving space. And you may very well not want to save space in board games, and you may want them on your shelf. The 3D maker who was turning more old school board games like checkers and chess into book form factors is still doing that, but I question if any of his 3D prints are really being tested that well for quality. I would much prefer the concept just be licensed and done through injection molding and through Hasbro selling them. Concept is cool. There is a question, maybe it should just be done almost with laser cutting or paper folding instead. But yeah, he definitely is taking his time of making games, and only so many games will be made. Yeah, it definitely feels like in his designs everything looks like a nail because he only has the hammer of 3D printing, where the same concept would be way cheaper if it was like laser cut wood pieces as a design, or if you could get enough of a budget to do injection molding, it would be better quality and cheaper. And then if you could figure out the origami folds, a cardboard folded thing that is all recyclable when you're done with it, is fairly appealing as an idea too. Moving on, PlayStation Plus monthly games lineup for May 26, 2026 has been announced. Wu Chang, Nine Souls, and FC 26. Let's see. Phonopolis launches May 20th. It's a 3D puzzle adventure game by Amanita Design. I don't recognize it. I don't know why things now seem to be coming in chunks of two. Like, you'll see a story about the game, then you'll see a story about a different game, then you'll see those two games. It probably is a timer delay thing, and I need to increase the delay some more. That would probably make a lot of sense, although it's gonna make the whole experience take even longer, even if I increased it by like 1 second. 1 second times 100 potential tabs being opened would be 100 seconds. Thick as Thieves has been priced at $4.99, launched to serve as an introductory campaign. To me that feels like this is a multiplayer game where they're going to get you on some kind of microtransactions, or an unfinished game that they're pretending isn't an unfinished game. The trailer for this game, now that I remember it and see it, looks kind of interesting, but yeah, it was very much multiplayer focused, and yeah, could very easily not be much of a game. Monopolis is here. Yep. No More Room in Hell 2 launches this summer for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. leave it at that. It is, as you can see, mixed. While I'm here, I'm thinking about it. Let's see. Which of these was auto opening things? I think it probably was this one as far as code goes. Just gonna see if that's the case. No, it's not in the code here, is it? It's in the code here. Auto open Steam links. Gonna open that, and then I'm gonna adjust the timeout here. All right, we go from a timeout of 150 to 200, then save and close. And sometimes tweaking code is that easy. Most times it is not. Warhammer 40k Speed Freaks for PS5, Xbox Series launches May 21st. Because I tweaked the code on the timeout there, just for Gamatsu, it won't change how it works for any of the other sites, which maybe it works fine for the other sites. Maybe Gamatsu just needed a little bit of a more delay. Here we can see Speed Freaks. Yeah, it kind of feels like you could just be this hardcore Warhammer 40k fan, and I know there are 40k fans out there. I don't know how many of them care about any of the video games though. But yeah, they make so many different games and such a variety of games under the Warhammer banner that you could just be all about Warhammer all the time. This is online player versus player only. That's why it's not on the wish list. I was trying to figure that out. But yeah, too many of the Warhammer games also kind of suck and get reviewed very badly, so you wouldn't be a very happy fan if you were only playing Warhammer games. Or only playing Warhammer video games. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a fandom of people who are fans of like Warhammer and things like that in the real world, and then they play video games that are very different, and that is just their second hobby that they take a break from their main hobby from. That kind of makes some sense to me. You know, I talk about watching streaming and talk about potentially watching movies, and those are complementary but very different from playing video games. Over Requiems launches August 20th in the West. It is a dark reimagining of The Wizard of Oz. It is a Otome visual novel also. Console Archives Roga Armored Force is launching April 30th. Feels like another Western game, another Eastern game that never came to the West. Arcade Archive vs. Cyber Commando launches April 30th. Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection Crossplay update is now available, plus new online modes, technical enhancements, and bug fixes. I had forgotten about the Legacy Collection, but yeah, crossplay allows players to compete against one another on across PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo, and PC platforms in both quick play and online arcade modes. This is a bunch of emulators, so the fact that they've been able to get emulators to do cross-play and online play in the first place is really a testament to the emulators' increased new features that they've been able to add. In a funny way, though, I do think the Legacy Collection is probably the Mortal Kombat games I would be most interested in playing versus playing the most recent Mortal Kombat. And I guess this is the thing that is coming out and being promoted for Mortal Kombat 2, the movie. But yeah, like the most recent couple of Mortal Kombat games aren't really relevant at this point. And yeah, Injustice as a side game in the Mortal Kombat style isn't really that relevant. The whole Warner Brothers merger thing is still going through, and the dust is only beginning to maybe settle a little bit. It probably hasn't even begun to settle as far as who is actually going to be making decisions and what is going to be made and greenlit once the acquisition actually is finalized. And if it's anything like Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard, it still hasn't felt like Microsoft has come in and set any real guidance or plan in place with Activision Blizzard. It feels like Activision Blizzard has just been doing what they would have been doing had they remained independent. Maybe with the new lady in charge of Xbox, we'll start to see something feel different from their releases and the way they do things. Moving on, the co-op roguelite action RPG Above Land Rhapsody has been announced for PC. Very rarely do we get a character with a steel chair, and that definitely feels like that's a reference to wrestling, and that this might be a meme game or a joke game. Now here you can see a character with a guitar, a character with a bow and arrow. It's a pretty background. Character with some kind of steampunk hammer. Character with a sword. It's too much variety, too many different color palettes, too many different types of weapons. Here's a basketball thing. This is almost certainly a joke game. And I don't know if you can really have like a joke open world MMO experience. Wild, outrageous weapons, craft wild builds, dive into chaotic runs, where no two adventures are ever the same. I'm going to put this on the fault list just because I want to see what the reviews are. And then there's a bit of a red flag when it's English and Chinese, because it does just feel like this is a Chinese company that had a Chinese JRPG already in development and then decided to do something weird and sell it to the Western world. This is mixed overall, although the 21 reviews recently are giving it positive reviews. It is questionable whether you would ever get over that 60% mixed experience. I think in this case I would make an exception though and just go ahead and put it on the wish list. It is also interesting here how Microsoft is not mentioned at all in this, and I guess Microsoft wouldn't be mentioned in this. I don't know why I was thinking Microsoft owned the rights to Mortal Kombat, but no, they don't, do they? But yeah. I imagine whoever Digital Eclipse is owns the rights to Mortal Kombat, and or at least these old Mortal Kombat games. And I imagine they're not the same people who actually made the old Mortal Kombat games. But honestly, even if you did have the same people who were programming Mortal Kombat 1 for arcade machines decades ago, they almost certainly don't have the modern skills to know how to program a Mortal Kombat game in a custom modern engine, which you might need for a fighting game, or maybe in the Unreal Engine. It would be an interesting exploration to find out what fighting game might exist that actually is made in the Unreal Engine, and how hard was it to take the Unreal Engine, which is mostly for first-person shooters, and convert it to run in an Unreal Engine. DF Retro was also talking about an interesting thing where Unity, or at least DF Retro is one of the people at DF Retro, is suspecting that the fact that the mouse PI for a hire game is made in Unity is limiting the amount of performance for cross compatibility, and that DF Retro is speculating that mouse PI for hire, had it been made on the open source like GZ Doom or ZX Doom, one of the, whatever the name is of one of the open source Doom engines, that performance might have been a lot higher. Which I don't know if that really is true or not, but it's an interesting thought that a public open source Doom engine would give you potentially more performance. Probably give you way worse graphics too, though. The Blood of Dawnwalker launches September 13th. Yeah, it kind of feels like a false comparison to say that Unity is cross-platform, and because Unity is cross-platform, it has no optimizations per platform when something is being compiled and running. Yeah, that is a pretty big assumption, where it almost certainly is not the truth, too. Almost certainly a Unity game is optimized to run on the Xbox when you make the Xbox version, and optimized to run on the PlayStation when you make the PlayStation version, and then optimized to run on PC for the PC version. I would assume that's the case. Let's see. For Loop details the cube-shaped scanner boss. Keep moving to stay alive. This is a different game than the game called The Cube, which I think came out relatively recently. I think. Maybe not. For Loop is not out yet, and I guess that's perhaps all I can really say at the moment. The 2.5D roguelike fighting game hybrid Shot One Fighters has been announced for PC. Too many colors for this color palette. You got like a whole purple section showing you two characters, and then a kind of orangish section, and then a red section, and then some green, and some blue, and then a bright yellow here, and some white. Probably too many characters being shown on the screen in the first place, since it is going to be player versus player, or character versus character 1v1 fighting, it looks like. It's a weird art style, and I think that's about as much as I can say. Like, I'm not really an expert in fighting games, so in screenshots is not going to tell you much about a fighting game, but I would say the weird art style doesn't really feel like it fits what you'd expect from a fighting game. The belly window here feels like they're pushing lewdness. The eye patch, the wolf character, the cat character, all screams that this is a not particularly serious game, and so I think fighter game fans want their games to be serious. So I wouldn't put a lot of thought into thinking that that is going to be the next big thing as far as fighting games, which is questionable whether there ever will be a next big thing in fighter games, or how big the fighting game audience even really is. Yeah, some of these niche esports type things, type games, are only really popular amongst their small audience. A diorama break Kickstarter campaign has been launched. It's a Japanese-inspired strategy RPG where you talk to the hero. Yeah, it's been a while since we've had things just labeled as Japanese-inspired. It always felt kind of ridiculous to say that, but I mean, it was something also that was probably adding to the sales numbers. Alright, well, before I go any further, I'm going to take another short break and try and pause again. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. So yeah, we're still going through the Gematsu articles. Kyoku last summer launches May 28th. It's a cozy adventure game. I think we've seen this before, or seen several of this before. It is kind of crazy, I think, to have summer adventure video games when most kids, I think, in the United States these days are not going fishing, and would not go fishing in the first place, as far as what a summer adventure would be. Yeah, inherently, fishing with a rod and reel is a hassle, requires extra equipment, and it's just not particularly appealing to kids. I don't think it was that appealing even in previous generations. Generations before generations, yes, it was appealing because you didn't have much other to do. If it was either go fish in a stream and catch fish that you actually were going to eat, or read a book, if those were your only two options, sure, fishing is an attractive option. But if it's play a video game versus actually fishing or watch TV or listen to music, I think kids would select that. And frankly, they might even select books, because the books are more interesting these days too for kids. So it's this kind of like fake nostalgia, and I kind of feel like even stories like Tom Sawyer were in a lot of ways built around real fake made up nostalgia that never really existed. But yeah, in a lot of ways it's kind of also just like, this is the Pokemon adventure where kids are allowed to wander outside on their own on an island and just do whatever they want without any real structure or rules, or which, yeah, parents tend not to do that. Parents a lot of times aren't even teaching kids how to ride bicycles because they wouldn't trust them to ride bicycles to or from school even when they're high schoolers. So there's just kind of no reason for them to have that knowledge. And we might have a swing change there too. Honestly, I'm not sure I have seen this game. I was thinking of a different game, I think. You have your diverse cast of friends here being shown too, which clearly is more idealized than likely to actually happen. And inside of it, they have their own little Pokemon card game experience. Yeah, going crabbing in particular instead of fishing would be particularly weird. I suppose there might be a new generation where kids and their parents are more about going out and about. Physical activity is certainly good, so going out and about and doing physical things and being encouraged to do that more. Particularly with the economic times, we might start to see a lot more outdoor activities that take a lot longer and cost a lot less, compared to the roaring 90s and 2000s where it was all about being inside in the air conditioning, watching movies, and playing with gadgets. Yeah. Moving on, Shibuya Scramble. Man, boy, did I mispronounce that the first time. Shibuya Scramble Stories main cast has been announced. I think this is a live action Japanese game, if I was to guess. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth demo for the Xbox Series and Switch 2 is now available. Final Fantasy VII, we can see, is mostly positive. It came out in 2025. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, in particular. Rydo vs. Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance Special Live Concert has been announced. It's always funny that there's this one character that I've heard about in the last couple years that is pronounced the same way as my name. My name is spelled differently, and in no way is influenced or from this character. I have no idea about this character at all. In fact, how I got my name is a funny story I might tell again sometime, but not today. But it has nothing to do with any fandom around anything Japanese. It actually was something I created for myself as kind of a joke, as a gamer handle, probably a decade before I even had seen my first anime show. I mean, I may have seen one anime movie, but I was definitely very far away from the heyday of calling myself an otaku and being an anime fan, which nowadays I don't think anybody really calls themselves otakus. Moving on, Play Sim Game Show is set for May 10th. A free-to-play Unreal Engine 5 powered cinematic love adventure game called Silent Whispers has been announced for PC, iOS, and Android. This looks like another one of, well, the second one of these that have come out and potentially been successful. This is definitely for fans of the pretty boys, whether that's girls or guys. You'll probably pretend like it's a girl protagonist you're playing as, but won't mention it too often. It is weird that of all the gacha games, for a long time there, the number one spot was held by a game very similar to that. But not really that surprising, though. The target audience of mobile gaming probably is leaning more to female, and females outside of other restrictions probably would want to lead to more of the romance novel trash type stories. Which, yeah, a large amount of gacha games have romance novel or lewd content of some sort, and it's some kind of romance aspect to it, whether it's for more guys or girls. Usually it's for guys. Gmode Archives Plus Xenosaga Pied Piper launches April 30th in Japan. Yet another Gmode game getting ported over, only coming into Japan because they're not going to translate it to English. Tokoyo is how you would pronounce that, I guess. The Tower of Perpetuity, as developers announced a side-scrolling action-adventure game called Meltmare for modern consoles and PC. That was a terrible reading of the headline. Yeah. I'm glad I can read words and have familiarity with words. I don't know how my grasp of the English language is actually as good as it is, considering how little I read as a kid. But yeah, there are definitely some videos out there of modern generations of people not being able, having never experienced or even run into words. There was one I saw on Reddit earlier where people hand college kids, it looks like cards, and it's written in cursive, and it says, like the word silhouette is the first big word that they look like they're gonna stumble on. And yeah, you should know what the word silhouette looks like. You should be able to recognize it, even if I get tongue-tied and mispronounce silhouette. I actually get more tongue-tied the more I think about it. I think as I try to pronounce the word. But yeah, the college kids though may be victims of being taught how to sound out words instead of recognizing and memorizing the whole word, which at some level being able to sound out words to learn a new word is a helpful skill, but it is probably not the only skill that should be taught, and you probably should gain a level of familiarity with words and knowing what they look like and being able to recognize them instantaneously. I think there probably was a de-emphasis on vocabulary in the English classes at some points too, because yeah, there definitely have been some people that I've run into that have had poor vocabularies, just unacceptably poor. And yeah, the English language sucks, and maybe there should be half as many words in there, and then vocabulary wouldn't be a problem, but the reality is that the words exist, and if you're reading an old book, you shouldn't ever really run into too many words that you don't know what the meaning of them are. Anyways, that's just a ramble, and we don't have time for rambles. The Rugrats Retro Rewind collection has been announced for the PS5 and Switch. The Steam controller launches May 4th for $99. I definitely won't be getting one. Actually, this month in particular, I'm going to try and spend a lot less money, particularly on random things, just to maybe save a few bucks here and there. And there aren't, I think, going to be any major sales in May, so it's probably a decent time to do that. Of course, there's almost a direct connection between how much money I spend and how much I actually get accomplished as far as cleaning, decluttering, and remodeling my house. But yeah, this month would be a good month to pull back on that. Sonic Racing Crossworlds Captain Majima content drop update launches April 29th. Yeah. Still getting new content for Sonic Racing Crossworlds. Unfortunately, nobody really talking about it. And at this point, nobody really playing it. The all-time peak was 13,000 people. The 24-hour peak is 620 people. So it very much is the case that I would need a pretty high discount for the full version of this game before I would get it. And it would be gotten very much as this is something that is kind of close to Mario Kart on PC, because Mario Kart is never coming to PC. I mean, that's how it plays. And frankly, I still would be a little dubious, because I'd be a little afraid that there's some kind of limitation on what your experience can be if you play single player only. It definitely feels like Sega did not put enough money behind advertising and pushing Sonic Racing. There really seems like they could have really shoved Sonic Racing on the Xbox and the PlayStation and promoted it a lot more, and even the Nintendo Switch to promote it a lot more. Yeah, and that is a problem with some Japanese companies, is that they'll put out products, do the bare minimum of advertising, and then expect sales to be through the roof. And in the past, I guess that probably has worked, but now it doesn't. Let's see, Core Breaker launches in early access on May 9th. It's a fast-paced action platformer with roguelite like elements. Yeah. And one more thing from Gamatsu and then we're done. Let's see. Digital Brothers has acquired the Wu Chang Fallen Feathers IP as the sales top 1 million. Here we have some kind of creepy monster girl from the looks of it. She has like a extra head back here in the scar all over her chest. So they've just bought the IP rights to the company. I'm not sure if they really worked on the game. So it is uncertain what that will really change, if anything. You can see that in the last 30 days, Wu Chang Fallen Feathers has been 81% positive with 458 reviews, but overall it's been mixed. And it's a single player game, so I don't know what has been improved. We could look a little bit here and see if maybe the reviews give us a hint. This game had such a unfortunate release / reputation for what it really is. No, not that it didn't deserve the backlash for the awful performance. It still has performance issues and the censorship, but it's generally a great game. I finished it 3 times, 2 of them being New Game and New Game Plus on Game Pass and 1 on Steam. Here we have the game itself is very good. It's just so unoptimized that it's impossible not to get distracted by it, and it takes all the fun away. And notice here we are seeing something new on Steam where either they have gone out of their way to add their reviewers' PC specs, or this is just the new thing where you will see the reviewers' PC specs. A Ryzen 7 7800 X3D and 32 gigs of RAM with a 9070 XT 16 gigabytes RAM, both AMD, should be powerful enough to run a decently optimized game. And this came out April 17th, so let's see if we can see any other PC specs anywhere. I wouldn't be surprised if the PC specs prompts to embed that. No, this is April 27th and it doesn't have PC specs. Yeah, and I don't know what the censorship thing is. Recently posted stuff does seem to be increasingly having the PC specs, but not all of them. And maybe it's not really necessary for the reviewer's PC specs to be shown on every review. There's plenty of room on this vertical format in particular, but even on horizontal there'd be plenty of room to maybe squeeze it down into a line here, or collapse it down with a triangle instead of showing it. They are keeping the PC specs relatively simplistic here too, and it is just the CPU and GPU and the amount of RAM with the CPU and the video RAM with the GPU. They're not getting into anything that would less likely affect things, such as the motherboard or the sound card or the internet connection interface, or if a controller was being used or not. At the very least, it feels like you could get one line here where it's like Windows 10. Notice that the positive reviews here also are showing an NVIDIA graphics card, GeForce cards. So that alone might be where performance issues are varying, in that the AMD graphics cards are just not optimized. Yeah, I just don't know where the censorship here would be, but it does seem like you're playing as a female character, so one's imagination can go in many different directions. Is there other Wu Chang games, and is Wu Chang actually a series of games, or is it just a Chinese word that means something fairly generic? Yeah, for Asian countries, women being topless is fairly common in the past. Yeah, there's a lot of humidity and heat that would justify that. Alright, moving on to gaming on Linux articles now. Let's try and go through these quickly. More retro goodies. Microsoft has open sourced 86 DOS and PC DOS. This is after already open sourcing MS-DOS 4.0 in 2024. I feel like 86 DOS and PC DOS were spin-offs of DOS for specific reasons. The real reason why they're probably open sourcing these things, though, is because they're just not being used anymore, and they just don't want to maintain them while Microsoft wants to move to AI. I wouldn't be surprised if 86 DOS and PC DOS also didn't belong to Microsoft, and then Microsoft won them in some kind of lawsuit. Yeah. There was several different DOSes originally, disk operating systems, that were developed, and MS-DOS, Microsoft DOS, just became the default one, being IBM computer compatible. IBM wanted to make the hardware, stupidly not caring about the software, and as such, IBM eventually went out of business and is not a computer hardware seller of any note today, where Microsoft became one of the most successful companies ever. And there is, I believe, a story of when Bill Gates, I think it was Bill Gates, was going to meet with IBM. They hadn't finished, or they hadn't written the disk operating system software by the time they had set up the meeting, and so they spent the entire airplane flight over just hand writing the code, hoping it will work when they actually typed it into an IBM computer. I don't know how much of that story really is true, though. And certainly back in the day, that was how you wrote most of your code, is you were writing it by hand, or maybe typing it on a typewriter instead of typing it into a computer. Computers were giant expensive things originally, where you would have to schedule time to use them in a usually it would have been a college, but maybe even a military facility. And so very much would be the case that you would walk up to a computer very prepared to get your code in there and get it processing as fast as possible, because you only have a certain amount of time before they're going to kick you out and maybe force the code to stop processing. Yep. Of course, that's nowhere close to what the situation is these days, where everybody has a computer on their cell phone that's way more powerful than those old computers. I was thinking, as I am still terrible about coughing, I'm wondering if I went back probably over 10 years ago and listened to some of my very first YouTube videos, if there are situations where I'm coughing more or less. It's probably about the same amount. Like, I have random coughing fits and have had them for probably 2 or 3 decades, or if not my entire life. And it almost certainly is a symptom of chronic fatigue, but yeah. And there was a point where I was diagnosed with walking pneumonia, and I was coughing really bad at that point. But maybe that was the exception, not the norm. Moving on, cache arrives in Counter-Strike 2 while Valve continues working on Graph 2. Cache is a map, and Graph 2 is a fancy new character animation system. Valve is still just working on the source engine, is the general idea take from that. I gotta say, at this point, I'm pretty turned off from Tyler McVickerson, formerly referring to himself as Valve News Network. Like, his entire channel became successful and popular around speculating around Half-Life 3 and Valve News, and it has now become exclusively Half-Life 3 rumors and speculation, which is basically nothing. He's got nothing to say because Half-Life 3 is probably never coming out. He almost certainly would have done better for his own mental health, if not for the health of his channel, to have pivoted very hard once he became fairly popular around Valve News Network around a broader topic. If he had just been a news journalist around multiple video games, that probably would have helped him. Or he could have pivoted very hard to something completely different too, and that might have helped him better. But now he is very much pigeonholed into trying to create leaks where there are no leaks around Half-Life 3, and his content has become incredibly boring and repetitive, to the point where I don't watch any of it, and haven't for probably a year or more. Moving on, NVIDIA 580.159.03 driver release for Linux with some essential fixes. So yeah, small improvements every time, always nice. De novo DRM has been reportedly fully cracked open, and 2K apparently fights back with online checks. If this version of de novo DRM is cracked, it will just be a matter of time in which they'll come out with a new version of de novo. I think it is generally safe to assume older versions of de novo have long since been cracked too. So what is called de novo is really just a moving target of different technologies. I don't think there's inherently something at the core of de novo in all versions that couldn't be changed in a newer version to uncrack the newest versions of de novo. Yeah. It's just how much, I guess, time they want to spend programming the new versions of de novo and how good of a programmer they are. I'm glad we never got to the point where it's just like hardware keys that you even if you buy something digitally, you have to wait for a hardware SIM card to be mailed to you. Yeah, that would suck. Let's see, the PlayStation 5 Linux project can turn some PS5 consoles into Linux gaming machines. This is not emulating the PS5 to play PS5 games on Linux. This is getting the PlayStation 5 hardware to run Linux. And it seems like you will need older firmwares for it to work, and this seems like this would be very early days, so it wouldn't be anything I'd recommend people experimenting with unless you have just lost interest in using your PS5 at this point. Even then, it's probably better to sell a PS5 than to try to put Linux on it. Even when Linux was allowed on the PS3, it was fairly hard to justify what you would do by booting into Linux on the PS3. It would be a very different story nowadays if you could boot into Linux and it was a special SteamOS build for the PlayStation 5. That would be a big game changer there, with Proton's compatibility layer and just gaming being much better of an experience now on Linux than it was even a few years ago. So yeah, that would be the point where I'd start to get really hyped on this idea, is that if you could just effectively jailbreak your PlayStation 5 and turn it into a gaming PC, that would be interesting. But for the price, the PS5 is still probably not a great powerhouse as far as equipment, and you could probably, for the same price, build a gaming PC and maybe not recoup all of the cost if you sold the PS5, but recoup a lot of it. One of the few things I guess that still appeals around the PS5 is it has a 4K UHD player in it, and that will be one of the few reasons why I might get a PlayStation 5 or even a PlayStation 4, is just to have a new, yet another 4K player, as it might get harder and harder to get 4K players that are standalone. Oh, and speaking of home theater stuff, apparently there's this new Dolby Atmos wireless connectivity standard where you can have wireless speakers. I'm not sure if it really makes a lot of sense, because if you have a wireless speaker, you have to run power to it. And frankly, if you're having to run a plug to a speaker, you could probably just also run an audio wire to the speaker instead and not have a plug on it. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you're doing like a 7.1 setup, do you really want 7 plug outlets taken up in a room? Yeah, that is kind of ridiculous. As far as just how many plugs you would be doing. It would be really cool, I guess, if you could wirelessly charge the speakers and they ran off batteries. But the real Dolby Atmos wireless standard, I think it has a lot more to do with just being able to put speakers in the room, and then it can auto test and configure the acoustics of that specific room for you. But surround sound receivers have been able to do that for a long time. Let's see. Moving on, Bazlight Linux 44 lands for desktop gamers, and it's a big release. Well, I guess I am going to be rewarded for not getting around to building my computer. Currently, only the desktop edition appears to have been fully released. So you have to wait if you're on handhelds. So this moves to KDE Plasma 6.6 with the new Plasma login manager, GNOME 50, and kernel 6.19.x with kernel version 7.0 in the near future. And yes, they will include the Valve VRAM patch set with 7.0, which should be even more performance. The Mesa driver 26.05, their software package manager, I think, is what Bazaar is, version 0.7.15. PTY-XIS has been dropped, and the new console terminal is available with container support. So I guess that was the terminal app. SBOMs, I don't know what that is. Yeah, I don't know what a lot of this stuff is actually. Built-in support for Elgato 4K capture cards. Images have been reduced by a gigabyte. I don't think too many people actually care about that. ASUS Linux patches. If that's something that interests you. And Sunshine is no longer pre-installed. Sunshine is a fork of Moonshine that streams games to other devices. So yeah, the big three changes are here, and Bakelite 45 probably will feel even bigger of a change, because there's definitely some things that are being promised that aren't implemented yet. But that's the thing about Bakelite, is it is more of a individual release schedule where they're going to test things and make things work really good, and not just give you the newest thing and hope it works, but potentially it will break and blow up your system. Moving on, dbrand of course already has Steam controller skins. Dbrand may really be the only one I hear about as far as having skins. But even in this case, I was saying in the last stream, it feels weird that these skins weren't announced and shown off a couple weeks before the controller came out or months ago. It's kind of funny for them to just wait until the announcement when the hype is going to be around buying the controller and not buying skins. Yeah, the 3D schematics for how to make skins would have been out for a while, so the brand obviously could have done that easily. And I don't really see anything here that's too exciting. In fact, I am having a hard time seeing anything on these black skins. It feels like there's some kind of textures on them, but the picture I think is just too squished for me to see it. This one doesn't feel like it has a skin on it at all. And a testament certainly for a skin or controller is how does it feel. This one glows in the dark. Okay. Like, how does the controller feel without a skin? Because if a controller was great but it needs a skin over it to feel good, then the controller is not great. Let's see, moving on, Fedora Linux 44 is out now as one of the best Linux distributions. I don't know why you would specifically go with Fedora. Yeah. Like, there's still, it feels like there's probably a little too much competition going on between Linux distros, and I really would like to see, with this new era of Linux being focused on gaming and just Linux being a very different type of community than it was even a few years ago, I'd like to see the idea of a million different distros for a million different options go away, and people just get on board with there being one Linux operating system that everybody tends to agree upon, even if they could get it down to 5 Linux operating systems and nobody brings in a 6th option. That might be some decent progress there. I feel like Fedora doesn't feel like it's offering anything special. Ubuntu offers maybe a security that nobody really wants or needs. Mint feels like its offerings are unnecessary at this point. Yeah. I would love to see like the Linux Mint team say, you know what, we're going to just focus and work on Bazelite instead. Which would be a pretty big change for them, but it would probably be better for Bazelite for sure if that happened. Moving on, Steam Update has added battery indicators for wireless gamepads, quick chat, remote downloads management, and more. Which, yeah, the remote downloads management, if this is going to work the way I think it would, is something that I would want to see. I did want to see the ability to trigger a download on your home computer while you're playing on your Steam Deck. Is what I hope that means. Even if it was the other way around. What does it say? With the new remote downloads management feature, which allows you to control downloads on other systems, like adjusting downloads on a Steam Deck or handhelds from your PC. Quite useful if you have multiple systems in your household. I guess the question is, does it work both ways? Can I tell a game to download on my PC from my Steam Deck, and can I tell something to download on my Steam Deck from my PC? And then the next question is, can I get downloads to start downloading on both of those devices from the cell phone app? Yeah, several changes here, several improvements. Again, I fall back on it's nice to see improvements being made. Let's see. A Proton hotfix updated to fix Helldivers 2 on Linux SteamOS. Hotfix implying that they put out the patch earlier than you normally would because it was such a big issue. You can see Helldivers 2 still being played by quite a lot of people as an online co-op game, despite the fact that in the last 30 days it really has not been reviewed particularly well. Anthropic has begun funding Blender as a corporate patron. The Blender Foundation announced today that Anthropic, the AI company, has begun funding them, joining up as a corporate patron. For those who somewhat don't know what Blender is, it's the world's most popular free and open source 3D creation software. It's filled full of features for modeling, animation, VFX, and more, and it's used for video games, movies, and so on. Being a corporate partner, Anthropic will donate at least €240,000 a year to Blender, joining the likes of Epic Games, Netflix, Wacom, Pico XR, and a couple other companies. This doesn't inherently mean that AI is coming to Blender. I wouldn't be surprised if some kind of generative AI features do come to Blender, since it's an open source project. But a lot of creative people certainly would not be happy if Blender all of a sudden had AI in it. Although in this case, Blender is such a complicated software to begin with. It's not like you're going to get a teenager using Blender out of the box in 5 minutes using AI to create something. Not now, not likely in the next 10 years would that be possible. Yeah, there's a quote here. In these uncertain and divisive times, we appreciate Anthropic's offering support to Blender project in the form of a patron level membership. This enables the Blender team to keep pursuing projects independently and to focus on building tools for artists and creators. A very generic statement. But yeah, Anthropic basically just became a Patreon supporter. That doesn't inherently mean they're going to have any influence. In a funny way, AI may just need software like Blender so that artists can continue to create new things so AI can ingest and steal those new things. That would be a weird balance, certainly. But yeah, any open source project, Blender or otherwise, is almost always struggling for money, and so this is almost certainly a good thing. The NVIDIA 595.71.05 stable drivers have been released for Linux. Facepunch launches Sandbox, the highly anticipated successor to Gary's mod. Yeah, we've already talked about that in previous streams. But noticeably, people are not happy with it. It is probably too complicated to use. Mixed reviews. I think I could probably take it off the follow list too, because it's a modding tool, not really software. Right off the bat, if you're looking for Gary's Mod 2 or even something that feels like a spiritual successor or a Source 2 software development kit, stop while you're ahead. This is not the place. I've been following the platform for 8 years. I was deeply interested, especially after Facepunch acquired their Source 2 license in 2020 as a developer. When I got a developer preview key in 2021, that's more or less what it was. It was hardly more than some new scripting features on top of Source 2. Pretty much what everyone was asking for in... This is too long of an article. Sandbox will be great and free, but it isn't right now. Let us filter out the AI slop. That may be a big problem too. I saw somebody reviewing Sandbox, and yeah, they said there was a lot of almost certainly copyrighted material that was in the internal marketplace. Quick crush on it. Well, at the core of it, there seems to be very detailed negative reasons, but nobody's getting to the short of it. AI slop games, terrible performance, a crappy game engine that was promised to be the next big game engine that would save indie games, ugly characters, and a bare box sandbox mode. The list goes on. Okay, I think that's probably the closest we're going to get to a short explanation. But yeah. In contrast, we can say Gary's mod is overwhelmingly positive, but also not something I think I really even need to own myself. That's why it's only on my wish list. And yeah, this whole thing does just feel like it's trying to be the next Roblox more than an actual programming software or even a modding thing. And at a certain level, I feel like modding tools should just either be mods for actual games on Steam, or they should be completely out of Steam. You know, there's always this danger of people claiming something as a modding tool when really it's just a packaging of a level editor or something like that, where you really aren't getting down to core programming where you could actually program anything new and exciting, and you instead are doing more like a Roblox or Minecraft game where you're within a very constricted environment and you're able to create some things but not a lot of things, and definitely not a lot of good things. Moving on, Proton Experimental and Proton 11 Beta have been updated to fix issues with the EA app. There is a long list of things that seem to have been updated here. Far too long of a list to actually read out. The popular ZSNES emulator returns as Super ZNES with enhanced features. Interesting. For the emulating scene, I'm sure. There's not too much I imagine you can really add to a Super NES emulator, though. Guess we can hit play here. It's a huge logo in the lower right corner. This might be a very old emulator from the looks of it. But yeah, I don't even really recognize what game that is they're showing, so being able to identify the potential improvements or performance there kind of falls out the window. And I guess inherently for Super NES games, if you were just showing Super Mario World, I imagine all Super NES emulators have those games perform particularly well. This is kind of a great example of where they're forcing in a fake widescreen and where games are covering up all the Mario image. Like a lot of old games are kind of clunky and slow and have very few characters on screen, or sometimes zoomed in, sometimes zoomed out in weird directions. It would be people who played a lot of Super Mario World that would recognize performance issues. It's not a terrible system, the fake sides, I would say, but it is pretty noticeable that there's a fake widescreen being created here by them just taking a picture of what they saw last in many cases. Yeah, this is a 16-minute video, so I'm not going to sit through any more of it. They probably are talking, but yeah, I'm not hearing any of it. Moving on, Canonical clarifies their AI plans for Ubuntu Linux, opt-in and easy to remove. Is what they're saying now, which I don't know why they make these announcements first without any of these caveats and then immediately have to add the caveats. I guess people are just hoping that they'll get away with it, and I guess some people do get away with it. Well, almost certainly if there wasn't some pushback, the opt-in would have been opt-out. Castle on Wheels, a medieval roguelike battle game. Wonderberg is coming this summer. Battlestar Galactica Scattered Hopes launches May 11th. I think we may have covered some of these games before. The clever engineering roguelike Rogue Voltage 1.0 arrives May 1st. Well, this is a new story. The Schedule 1 developer confirms that they're working on gamepad support and Steam Deck certification. Excuse me. Yeah, I'd be surprised though if that creates a great resurgence of people coming back to play Schedule 1. You can see it's overwhelmingly positive still, but yeah. I haven't even bothered to put it on the wish list just because if I was to get it, I don't think YouTube would be super happy about me playing it, and I'm not super interested in playing it myself. It might be interesting to compare this game to like GTA 6 when it comes out, if it ever comes out. I'm hearing people even talking about this is almost certainly hyped up advertising in the form of viral marketing, but I saw someone actually question if Pragmata is going to beat GTA 6, and almost certainly that is not the case. That there will just be a ton of people that buy GTA 6 without reading reviews and beat Pragmata on that aspect alone. Zenless Zone Zero is heading to Steam in Q2 of 2026. This, I think, is a mobile game at the moment. Yeah. Anime style action RPG game. Launched mobile first, I believe. Valve has plans for a Steam Deck 2 plus a brief Steam Machine Steam Frame update. There's a whole article here we could read. It's not really important though. We'll see what happens when it happens. I'm trying to save some time here. That'll bring us to the GameDeveloper.com articles. Landfall and Aggro Crab team up for a Make-A-Wish combo bundle. Which, yeah. We really haven't had a lot of charity bundles that are special versus just humble bundle bundles. Most of the companies really just want to have a humble bundle where the companies are still getting a decent third of the sales cost, unless you go in there and change the sliders. And the humble bundle now won't let you change the sliders, so 100% of it goes to charity. They're going to take their cut no matter what, of some amount. At the very least, there's a minimum amount you can offer them. Yeah, I'm trying to adjust myself in the chair and really uncomfortable. I gotta figure out a way to play standing. DF Retro. Not the most recent video, but the video before them. They had one guy on a treadmill while talking, and it was very obvious that that was affecting his breathing quite a bit, and so he sounded winded as he was talking, as well as there was a camera in front of him, so he was swaying back and forth as he was walking on a treadmill. I don't think we are anywhere close to it becoming normalized that people would be on walking treadmills while talking to a podcast. But yeah, for me, I gotta figure out something here. And maybe it is, that's a thought. Yeah, maybe I'll just grab a new pillow every time I take a bathroom break during these streams and just throw it on the pile. Just add some more pillows and some more cushioning. The whole thing with the alternating pressure pad was supposed to help with it, and it almost certainly does help, but dialing it down to the right pressure doesn't seem to be super easy, as it were. Starbreeze is going to develop a second payday experience in Roblox. that maybe all Starbreeze can really do at this point is just put Payday and other things. It's still crazy how Payday is basically Left 4 Dead but robbing banks, and for years I saw people talking about Starbreeze and Payday, and it never really occurred to me that that was what the game was. I imagine there's lots of games that, even for myself, I'm not really aware of what they are and how they play. And for your average gamer, I imagine that's the vast majority of games, is that people may know the name or get a general idea of what kind of game it is, but not really know any more details than that. Yeah, I could see like a lot of people knowing that Dead Space is a horror game, but not really knowing the full details of like the RPG upgrade elements of the game. They probably would know the details of the limb cutting off of the game, cutting off the limbs of the monsters. Digital Brothers bought the rights to Wu Chang Fallen Feathers for £4 million, which honestly is not a lot of money for the rights to a game. Sony isn't going to increase the PlayStation household hardware prices in Southeast Asia. Yep. I guess the question is, are we potentially going to see second rounds of price hikes around the PlayStation? Because that does feel like once the price has been hiked in all the major markets around the world, Sony may very well say, we're still not making enough money, so let's just hike the price again. Moving on, GitHub Copilot is pivoting to usage-based billing after becoming unsustainable. The company says the new approach better aligns with pricing with actual usage and not just a price hike in disguise. Copilot is Microsoft's attempt at AI, and them forcing it into GitHub was not welcome, and Microsoft acquiring and owning GitHub was not welcome in the first place for this reason amongst many others. So yeah, basically you're an AI slop coder, vibe coder, if you're using GitHub Copilot, whether you've been tricked into using it or not. But we are also starting to see where the costs just aren't making sense, so the idea of giving away AI no longer makes sense. AI is basically like trying to bring a new designer drug to the market, I would imagine. You have to get people hooked on it before you raise the price to be profitable on it, and I think they've failed horribly. I guess thank goodness the nerds who run, or the people that at least pretend to be nerds who run AI companies, were not good drug dealers. Otherwise AI would have become much more of a product that people were addicted to. But yeah, most of the people who are talking about AI are just, I think, personally, it's my opinion, very disconnected from reality and the average person. Yeah, and that's a big reason why it's failing too. I wouldn't be calling anything AI, and I definitely, if I was Microsoft, would not be calling anything Copilot at this point. Let's see. Magic the Gathering Arena developers are unionizing to deliver Gen AI and layoff protections. Quote, we know workers that make the game canon should be treated better. Good for them. It is also almost certainly another example of Wizards of the Coast and their parent company Hasbro just being run terribly. You tend not to be one of the first companies in an industry to to unionize if your company is being run well and your employees are happy and well paid. Is that actually going to change anything with Magic the Gathering Arena? Probably not much, because I don't think the problem was with the digital version of Magic the Gathering. The problem is with the actual cards that Magic are making and selling these days, and have been for a while. Like, in the economics of trying to be a Magic fan, even digitally, not making sense. Alright, well, that's going to bring us to all new games on Steam. It is the same old rules here, where if I'm uninterested and not going to make a YouTube short, I'll swipe down to close it. If I am interested in it, I'll put it on the follow list and click that follow list button here. And then if I just want to make a YouTube short, I will swipe to right to leave the tab open. Which this is another thing that concerned me leaving Blueprints running, is that when I'm running my macro and opening up all these tabs, it might very well be using up and filling up all of my RAM, and that might cause a game to crash even if it's just paused in the background. If it has a checkbox or a follow list checked already, that means we've already looked at it and dealt with it. I'm leaving the tabs open in the thought that I might make a YouTube short around it in the future. That process still needs a ton of programming and work, but the odds of me actually doing any programming while playing Blueprints is pretty low. I do now have a script that is going to close any tabs that don't support the English language, so that saves me 2 or 3 games that I would have looked at otherwise. And do plan on making a better, bigger script later. And yeah, I'm yawning right now, so it kind of makes some sense, and may very well happen that I will finish today's stream and then take a nap, is probably the right way to describe it, and then wake up at like 2 or 3 in the morning and then get back to playing Blueprints. You know, it is funny that the title of Blueprints is a pun, but there really aren't any other puns per se in the game. I don't think. Anyways, there are words that sound similar to other words, but that's not what a pun is. It's not just a homophone where things sound similar. I think that's the right word. Puns involve more precise, witty placement of words. And I don't have a lot to say today, other than ow, ow, ow. You know what? I was thinking about, this is a mobile game, obviously a lewd mobile game. That's funny. That one had sexual content, but it was like the 5th or 6th tag, and that got past my mature content warning. That doesn't happen. Hasn't happened before. And usually it would be something like this. Yeah, if I do the programming to record the warm-up and play it at the end of the stream, frankly, there's another thought to record this section and then play it back. Does that thought make any sense? I don't think so. I think I'm just getting sleepy and my thought process is falling apart. Yeah, I guess if I looked at games at a separate time, there could be this interesting breakup that happens. But I wouldn't do it, is the problem. If I ended the stream after reading all the news and then was supposed to record a video going through all the games that came out for the next stream, I just wouldn't do it. I would get lazy. This really is killing me today. It was also killing me when I was playing Vampire Survivors a few months ago. Just too much sitting. And in that, I was playing a lot of it off screen on my Steam Deck, lying in bed instead. This is mostly negative so far. I'll give it some more time, but I don't think you're going to recover from that. Yep. 25 reviews, mostly negative, pretty much can squash the launch of a game, I think. Yeah, there's no solution for blueprints though. I could install it on my Steam Deck and play it, but the only time I would potentially do that is if I've ended the series for some reason and am then grinding to find some extra secrets, which I don't know if I would do that, and I don't know if there are going to be any extra secrets by the time I end the series. It does kind of feel like once you're done, you'll know you're done. And honestly, I might be done with blueprints once I get to just like the credits and less interested in revealing every single like B plot, C plot secret. Since the game doesn't have a save file checkpoint system that tells you how much progress you've made, as far as I know at least, it's kind of pointless to try and unlock everything. But I guess maybe the achievements would be the only real motivator there. That if I got to the credits and got most of it in the footage, and then there was just like one achievement for finding out a little bit more. But I imagine what I would do is I would just make a couple episodes after the credits and try and find those secrets on screen. I really hate to do things off screen and just not have the footage. I only really do it when it's a fairly repetitive game and what is going to be shown has been shown multiple times before. Otherwise, I do prefer to make 100% content long plays with no editing. Not that YouTube prefers that, and the YouTube algorithm prefers that. And yeah, the whole editing concept is still not really viable. I don't know if I had money to pay an editor, I don't know if I'd ever find an editor good enough to actually edit videos down into anything. And yeah, looking at like Cracking the Cryptics, they're doing long plays of blueprints too, and they're not editing anything, I suspect. It'd be weird if they're putting out 2-hour videos and they're actually doing edits. Particularly for puzzle games, it makes a lot of sense to not edit. For most other games, probably could do more of that. But then it certainly then just becomes you could always edit more. I'm gonna give this a chance. It's probably nothing. I'm hoping I'm close to being done. It does kind of feel like there are slightly fewer games coming out now. Maybe that is just because I am not looking at non-English supported games. Maybe I'm skipping over some games accidentally because of the automation that I added to avoid non-English supported games. But yeah, it still feels like I could lose a few more games, and the plan is still to eliminate AI using games that admit to using AI at any level, which then would have the look at games be potentially a lot shorter. Like that may have only been 20 minutes really to go through all those games that time. Not that much. Alright, well, that's going to be it for this stream. We may very well have to deal with blueprints or no music in the background for a few weeks here. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching, because that helps me with the algorithm and would be a free way in which you can support me. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.